What's up, guys? Today we've got a big job ahead of us. My clutch actually went out on my S2000 here. I think either the clutch disc snapped in half or the throwout bearing went, but my money is on the clutch disc. And also while I'm at it, I'm going to be changing the starter because it grinds a little bit. And you can see here, it goes into gear, but as soon as I let out the clutch, nothing. Fixed. While the car's still on the ground, we're gonna get all the stuff done that needs to be done in the interior and in the engine bay. First, we're going to want to take the shift knob off, and we're going to want to take the center console up here. Get the center console up here. All you really got to do, what I do, is you just pull up on it. There's just a couple clips. You want to pull it up around your e-brake cable, and then underneath there's 3 clips. One's for your sunroof switch, the other one's for your hazards, and the other one's for your defrost. After that, you can pull that to the side. Then you're going to want to pull up your shift boot. And down here, there will be a rubber boot. You're going to want to pull this up. I'm going to have to go get a pair of pliers. There's a tab right here in the front. You can just grab that, start pulling it up. And there'll be 3 10mm bolts underneath. Once you remove those 3 10mm bolts, you can pull your shifter right out. And then there'll be a spring right here. You can just pull this out also. And then we're done in the interior. Next, what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to remove the exhaust manifold, because this actually blocks one of the transmission bolts, and it also prevents you from pulling the transmission off. So first we're going to want to remove these 3 12mm shield bolts. That way we can get to the exhaust manifold bolts to remove it from the head. Now that we have the shield off, we have access to all 7 of the manifold bolts, which these are also 12mm. Now that the manifold's loose, you can take the lower shield off, which there is 3 more 12mm bolts. We'll probably have to take this off, that way we can sneak this header out from underneath. There you go, guys. Now everything's done from the top here. Now we can go underneath and get the bottom 2 exhaust manifold bolts and pull this out. I'm actually absolutely astonished that I got all these bolts out with a wrench with no heat. Normally exhaust manifold bolts and shield bolts are always rusted or seized or they break. Hopefully this works as well for you as it did for me. Now when the car's in the air, you're going to want to remove the 2 bolts that go from your catalytic converter from your manifold. Those are 2 12mm. Then you're going to want to come underneath here and you can either take out this 14mm bracket that comes off the block to bolt your manifold up, or there'll be another 14mm that actually bolts into your block right here. Well, I'm going to remove that because that'll make a little more clearance by removing this bracket. While I was loosening that bolt, I realized you should really unclip your O2 sensor wire here. The plug is on top of your transmission, and there'll be 2 clips, one up here and one down here. All you're going to do is pop them out, that way you can lower your manifold and you don't damage your O2 sensor. Now that the exhaust manifold's out, now you have access to these 2 transmission bolts, and now you'll have room to pull the transmission out also. Next we're going to be removing the starter. Since we're going to be messing with the starter, it's a good idea to remove your battery cable, that way you don't spark or short anything out. All you want to do is get a 10mm wrench and pull your terminal apart, and you should be ready. Now if you come underneath the car, under the driver's side, if you look right here, you'll be able to have access to the lower starter bolt, which is a 14mm. The top is also a 14mm. But first what you want to do, well, since I'm going to be replacing the starter, the terminal socket right there. Looks like a 12 millimeter. Should be able to have access to take that off right there. So let's get a sneaker wrench up there and let's take this starter out. Now to get the upper starter bolt off, what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to take your serpentine belt off, which is just a 14 millimeter for the tensioner. Pull the belt off, move it to the side. Then you're going to want to take your top alternator bolt off, which is a 14 millimeter, and then loosen the lower alternator bolt, which is also 14 millimeter. Then you'll be able to slide the alternator to the side, giving this big opening right here. Then you're going to want to take a long extension with a swivel on the end, feed it back, and then you'll be able to take a flashlight, shoot it down the back here, and you'll be able to see the starter bolt. You're not going to be able to see on a camera because it's very difficult to see. But once you get it onto it, then you're going to want to take a breaker bar and break that bolt loose. I'll give you an idea. I think this is a 24 inch 3/8 extension here. But that's about the best way that I figured out that you can get this starter bolt out. So let's pull the starter out. Next, you're going to want to come under and take your drive shaft bolts out. There's six millimeter Allens. Get a 1/4 inch ratchet with a 6 millimeter, and you can remove these 6 bolts. Next, after you get the drive shaft out, you're going to want to remove the 4 10 millimeter bolts that bolt the boot to the body of the car. And then while you're under here, you can remove all your wiring harness from the transmission. Maybe your rear O2 sensor plug. And since we already got the front O2 sensor plug out, then we get the reverse light switch. And then the vehicle speed sensor. And we can pull the clips off all the way up the side of the transmission to there. And then while we're at it, we can remove these 2 12 millimeter bolts for the slave cylinder and pull this out. And let's get this done. Now that the boot bolts are out, got the slave out, and the wiring harness is all unclipped so from the transmission. Now we're gonna remove the 3 14 millimeter bolts, and we're gonna pull these 2 bolts out here to remove the mount. And then we're gonna lower the transmission a little bit. Then after that, we're gonna have to lower the subframe a little bit. That way we can get to the top transmission bolts. So let's get this transmission mount out. Now to lower the subframe, we're gonna come under the front of the car. And it'll be a 19 millimeter, a 19 millimeter, and a 17 millimeter, and it's the same 19, 19, and 17. You're gonna want to loosen these bolts. You're gonna want to have a impact gun here because these will be very tough to get out by hand. Now that the subframe is loose, you can start removing the transmission bolts. I would start first with the front 2 17 millimeters here, and from the other side we already got the 2 14 millimeters that went through the starter and bolted into the transmission. So let's get these 2 17s out. Now that we got those upper 2 17 millimeters out, now there'll be 2 14 millimeters on the bottom of the transmission. Now what I did to get these top bolts out, I ended up taking the center 2 19 millimeter bolts out of the subframe, and then I lowered are backed out, the back two 17 millimeters, just so right before the thread started coming out, like flush with the unibody of the car on both sides. That gave me enough clearance to drop down to get on top of the transmission. Now, to get the top two bolts, I really recommend having one of these swivel extensions with the swivel built in. This one's actually made by Cornwell, and then you want to use a shallow 17 millimeter socket. And that gives you enough clearance to get these top transmission bolts out. And then I also use, you're going to need a very long extension to reach up there. I use that 24-inch extension plus the 8-inch extension with the swivel, and that gave me enough reach to get up there to get those top transmission bolts. All right, I'm going to get this these last two upper bolts out, and then we're going to lower the transmission out. Now, right before you take the transmission out, I always leave a very easy access bolt in. That way, when you're taking those top two bolts out, the transmission could possibly fall down or something and injure you. I always leave an easy access bolt. This is on the driver's side, in the front, on the right behind the rear or the driver's side engine mount. I always leave an easy access transmission bolt left in. That way the transmission doesn't fall out and hurt you. So we're gonna get this last bolt out. It's always a good idea to support your transmission before you take your transmission out, because once again it could fall and hurt you. So let's get this last bolt out and remove this transmission. Alright, now as the transmission's out, you want to take all these 10 millimeter 12-point bolts out. You're going to need a 10 millimeter 12-point socket. I want to focus in on that. Alright, let's get this pressure plate off and see what the problem was. Alright, I guess the reason why the clutch wasn't engaging was because I guess these spring clips inside broke. I don't know how well you can see that. I've actually never seen that happen before. So, who knew that would actually cause it to not engage? Doesn't look like there's any other damage with it, though. The throttle bearing looks good. But got a new clutch, new flywheel, new clutch disc, pressure plate, throttle bearing, everything's new. So let's get this flywheel out. These are all 17 millimeter 12-point sockets again. So let's get the flywheel off next. Alright, now that everything's out and the problem was found, anytime before I install a clutch and in the middle of putting the new transmission in, I always take the clutch disc And I always test fit it on the splines just to be sure they sent you the right one, because that time you don't is the time that you're fighting to put that transmission in and the splines aren't correct. This one's correct, so that's all good. Now I already went ahead and installed the pilot bearing. I used a 1-inch socket and my press, and I pressed that new bearing in. And before we install this, I went in and picked up a tube of thread locker, blue, it's medium strength. I put these on the flywheel and clutch bolts because they're spinning at 9,000 RPMs, and the last thing you want is one of them to back out. So I always use the medium strength. So let's get this flywheel in. Now that the new flywheel's in, you torque these 17mm 12-point bolts here to 94 foot-pounds. Put a little dab of this Loctite on, medium strength. That way they don't back out from vibration. When they ship new flywheels, they always have a film of oil on it to prevent rust. Take a little brake cleaner, spray it on and wipe it off. And also the same thing for your pressure plate. I ordered a new OEM throttle bearing because I only use OEM ones. I highly recommend that with Honda, any type of Honda car really. Next, what we're gonna do is put the clutch and pressure plate in. Anytime you order a clutch kit, they have a clutch alignment tool. What you're going to want to do is take the tool, put it in the clutch disc, and then you're going to put the tool right in the pilot bearing that was installed, just like that. So that way the clutch stays centered when you put your pressure plate on. Now you want to torque all of these 10 millimeter 12 point bolts here to 19 foot-pounds. Alright, and after everything's all torqued, you can pull your clutch alignment tool out. And now we're ready to put the transmission back in. Now before you put your transmission back in, I would recommend cleaning the input shaft up with a wire brush, just to get any of the debris or rust or clutch material off. Then you want to get a little bit of grease, like packing grease, wheel bearing grease, and put it over the splines here, because it'll help the clutch disc over time not seize up and rust to it. And then also it's for the shaft right here for where the throttle bearing rides on. It helps it go a little bit smoother. And you don't want to put too much on, because you don't want it to grease slinging around. Just a nice slight film, just like that, on it is good enough. Alright, let's get this transmission in. Before I put this transmission in, I want to talk about the clutch that I purchased. I actually went with a, I guess you would consider it an eBay clutch. It's actually, the brand is E-Clutchmaster. The only reason I actually went with this and not a regular eBay clutch is because actually, I don't know how well you can see right there in the bottom, they're actually made in the USA. So I figured I'd give it a shot. It came with a white pound flywheel. It's about a 10-pound flywheel. Everything actually seemed to be pretty decent quality. I think I only paid $239 for the whole kit, but I did purchase a new OEM throttle bearing. So we'll see how this clutch works. It's rated for 485 horsepower. I actually bought instead of the stage 2, I got the stage 3 6-puck. I got this one because I plan on boosting my S2000 in the near future. So all of this is actually helping to prep for when I turbo it. So let's get this transmission in.